device or the output device. So in that case, there is a need of a program to wait. For instance, you are printing, you are doing something, you are preparing a document, now you want to print. You have done everything, you have sent the command for printing, but the printer is not connected. So what will happen? Because the processor or the CPU has done the command, has processed the command, and the commander has sent the printer, but the printer is not connected. So in that case, that commands will be sent to waiting state. That command will be sent to waiting state. So the moment you are going to connect a printer, automatically that command will be sent to the output device, which is the printer. But remember, the command was already processed. The command was already processed. So now the difference between the two, here, once a process has been given a chance to the CPU, that process will not be forcefully removed until it completes. That becomes the difference. This one, a process can come in and another one comes. The first process can be forced can be forcefully removed from the CPU. Another one is allowed. Then the other one, which was forcefully removed, and then is given another chance later to come in to the CPU. So in a case of non-preemptive, scheduling does not interrupt a process running in the CPU in the middle of execution. There is no interruption of a process. A process is allowed to complete. So that makes the difference between the two scheduling algorithms. So we want us now to look at the differences. We want us to look at the differences. What is now the difference? Actually, we have even seen the differences. We have talked about the interruption. The preemptive process cannot be interrupted in between non-preemptive, but for preemptive, a process can be interrupted. We have talked about starvation. Starvation, in the case of preemptive scheduling, if a priority process frequently arrives in the ready queue, low priority process may starve. You know, we also have that concept of starvation. So when we talk about starvation, what is the starvation? What is starvation? You know, in a case where I've given 3 examples of 3 processes, we have process 1, we have process 2, and we have process 3. All these processes are expected to access the CPU at the same time. But in the case of preemptive, we have said if a process which has high priority, when we talk about high priority, that process which has less pass time. And we have said that a pass time is that amount of time a process is expected to complete in the CPU. I mean, to utilize the CPU. If a process which has less pass time, assuming process 1 here, in this case, process 1 has 12 milliseconds, so that is the pass time. It arrived earlier, but it's supposed to take longer to complete. Process 2, let's say it has 3, and the process 3 has 2 pass time. In this case, process 1 arrived earlier. Process 1 arrived earlier, but the time this process is going to complete, it is longer than process 2 and the process 3. So what it means, if this process arrived earlier, this process comes in, this one will be allowed. This one will be terminated or will be forcefully removed, and this one will be allowed in because the time it's supposed to complete, it is less. So all of the pass time is less. So this process also will be allowed in. Remember, this process 1 was the first process to access the CPU. So meaning that the 2 processes will come late and they will be allowed in and they complete while process 1 is waiting. So that is what we call starvation. So a process can wait for a long period of time to access the CPU so that the other process can be allowed in to access the CPU while the first one waiting for a long period. So we say now process 1 has starved. That's what we call starving. So the process 1 will starve. So in the case of preemptive scheduling, there is no starvation, because in the case here, in the case of preemptive, we have starvation, because those processes which has long past time will be kept waiting, while those ones with less past time being allowed in. But in the case of non-preemptive, there is no scheduling, because in this case non-preemptive, in the case of non-preemptive, the processes have to wait. If process one arrived earlier, the other processes, they will have to wait until process one completes. So in that case, we don't use the word starvation, but we use the word convoy. It has convoy effect. It has what we call convoy effect. Yeah, when one process is given a lot of time and the other programs, other processes are kept waiting for a long period, we call it convoy effect. So those are some of the differences between the preemptive scheduling and non-preemptive scheduling. Now, unless there's a question there, I want us to look at the criteria, the scheduling criteria. Which criteria does the CPU uses to schedule the activities? So we look at the scheduling criteria. Look at the scheduling criteria. Scheduling criteria. So there are several different criteria that we consider when we are allocating or when we are assigning the best scheduling that we have talked about. So one of them we talk about is CPU utilization. One of the criteria that we'll talk about, number one, we have CPU utilization. We have CPU utilization. We have CPU utilization. So ideally, the CPU would be busy 100% of the time. So as not to waste even a 0 second, we need what we call scheduling. So one of the things we look at is the CPU utilization. How can we ensure that the CPU is utilized 100%? There is no idleness in the CPU. Yeah, ensuring that there is no idleness. So at a given time, there is no idle time in the CPU. So we have to consider one of the criteria there is looking at the utilization. How can we give the maximum utilization of the CPU so that at a given time there is no idle of the CPU? Then we also look at what we call the throughput. Throughputs. I've talked about throughputs, and I've said that throughput is the number or an amount of materials or items which are passing through a system. How can we ensure that there is an optimum utilization of resources? How can we ensure that there is enough materials or items are allowed to pass to the CPU? So the number of processes completed per unit time may range either from 10 to 1 per hour, depending on the specific processes. So we have also to consider the throughputs, the number of materials or the number of items that passes throughout a system is one of the things that we consider. Then we also have what we call turnaround time. We also have turnaround time. We have turnaround time. Turnaround time is the time required for a particular process to complete for submission. So you know, from the time a process starts up to the time the process completes, we call it turnaround time. So turnaround time includes what we call the waiting time. If there is a process started at a given time and completed at a given time, so we also include the waiting time. If that process was paused to wait for a specific input device or output device, so that amount of time that process taken to complete is what we call turnaround time. Then we also have what we call waiting time. We also have waiting time. So the waiting time, how much time process spend in a ready queue? How much a process spends in the ready queue? How much time a process spends in the ready queue is another thing that we'll have to talk about. And then we also have the response time. We have the waiting time. I've talked about the waiting time. Then we have the response time. Response time. Response time. The response time, the time taken an interactive program from the issue of a command to the commence of a response to that command. Yeah. So the moment you issue a command and the time that command commences to execute is what we call response time. Is what we call response time. Then we also have what we call the arrival time. We also have what we call the arrival time. Arrival time, the time at which the process arrives in the ready queue. A time at which the process arrives in the ready queue. I've actually talked about those process states. I've talked about those states: the start, ready, running, and termination. At what time did the process arrive at the time queue? We also look at that time, the arrival time. Then we also have the completion time. The completion time. A completion time is now the time which the process completes the execution. We have the completion time. The time in which the process completes in its execution is what we call completion time. Then we also have what we call past. We have past time. We have past time. Past time here, we talk about the time required for a process for the CPU execution. So when we talk of the past time, now this is the amount of time that is expected for a program or a process to spend in the CPU. How long will this program, how much time the process is going to take or is going to take in the CPU to be executed is what we call the past time. Then we now when you are in fact we are supposed to work to find, if in case you want to find the turnaround time, if you want to find the turnaround time, so turnaround time is equivalent to completion time minus completion time minus the arrival time. So here, when you want to calculate if you want to get the turnaround time, I've said we consider the completion time. Then we minus the arrival time. We minus the arrival time. The arrival time. If you want to find the waiting time, the waiting time, here now, it is now the turnaround time minus past time. Waiting time is the difference between the turnaround time minus the past time. So turnaround time here is turnaround time minus past time. I want to believe that you have understood the difference between turnaround time and completion time. Yeah. So we want us now to look at now what we call types of scheduling algorithms. And when we'll be discussing about scheduling algorithms, some of these formulas are the ones that we're going to apply. So let's now look at different types of scheduling algorithms. We have talked about types of scheduling. So let's talk about scheduling, types of scheduling algorithms. So in this case, types of scheduling algorithms. Talk about types of scheduling algorithms. So the first one we talk about is first come, first served. So the first one we have is first come, first served. So this is FCFS. First come, first served. First come, first served. So first come, first served, the process which arrives first in the ready queue is first assigned the CPU. So in this case of this algorithm, we focus much on the arrival time. The process which arrives in the ready queue is the first process to be given allocation to the CPU. Then in the case of a tie, in case two processes arrives in the ready queue at the same time, what will happen? In that case, process with smaller process ID is executed first. In a case where, let's say, we have process 1, process 2, process 3. Process 1 and process 2 arrives in the ready queue because we have said it's about the arrival time. The one which arrives earlier will be given the priority. In a case where two processes arrives at the same time, we look at the process ID. Now the process ID is this one. This is process 1, process 2. So 1 is the process ID. This is actually the process IDs. In a case where two processes arrives in the ready queue at the same time, we'll be considering what we call the process ID. And this kind of algorithm uses non-preemptive scheduling. Remember, we said in non-preemptive scheduling, a process will not be forcibly removed from the CPU. There is no way you will move. You cannot force a process from the CPU. It has to given time to complete. So this kind of algorithm uses what you call non-preemptive. It uses what you call non-preemptive scheduling. It uses non-preemptive scheduling. It uses non-preemptive scheduling. So this can let's now talk about the advantages of this. The advantages of first come, first serve. The first one, it is easier, it is simple and easier to understand. This algorithm is simple and easy to understand, and it can be easily implemented using the queue data structure. It is easier to implement this one using a queue data structure. And another one, we say it does not lead to starvation. It does not lead to starvation. Yeah, remember we said in the case of first come, first serve, no program is going to be kept waiting for a long period of time. So it depends on how the time that you arrived, depends on the time the process arrived, that is the time the process will be allowed in. So there is no starvation in the case of first come, first serve. So, but now there is advantages with this type of algorithm. There is advantages with this type of algorithm. It does not consider the priority or past time of the process. Here, there is no like a priority. You know, a case where people are assuming that you have an event. Let's assume you have an event. There is an event happening somewhere. Like now, we can take a case study. We have an event at the stadium. And in that case, there are a number of people are invited to that event. So we have the governors are coming in, the cabinet secretaries are coming. So, and there are other ordinary people are coming in with their vehicles. You see, what will happen in that case, those people who have, the ordinary people will be asked to pave way for these prominent people, the governors. So they will be kept waiting while these prominent people are passing to the event. Yeah. So that means even if you arrived earlier, you will be kept waiting while these big people are coming in. So you see now, your arrival time does not matter. Even if you came earlier, still the other guys who came late, they will be allowed in. You know what that is now? The people are now kept waiting. In that case, they will be starving. In a process, we call it starving. They will be starving because they will be kept waiting for long. But in the case of first come, first serve, it does not apply that concept of preemption. So it does not matter how big you are in the case of first come. You are going to be given a priority, depends on the time you arrived. If you arrived earlier, then you will be given a chance. Even if others come later, they will be kept waiting while you are given time to utilize the resource. So that is all about the first come. So in the case of the disadvantages here, we have said it does not consider the priority. It does not consider the priority. So it is about which program or which process arrived earlier in the ready queue. It suffers from the Conifo effect. It suffers from the Conifo effect. In fact, now I've told you we have, what is now the difference between starvation? What is the difference between starvation and a Conifo effect? Yeah. What is the difference between starvation and Conifo effect? What can you say in that case?
The starvation process kept waiting.
Yes, a starvation process is kept waiting, and a convoy. And the convoy effect. And now, for you to be able to differentiate the two, starvation actually applies in the preemptive scheduling, whereby a process which has high priority are given, are allowed in, and the other which was the lower priorities are kept waiting. So that is what we have said is what we call starvation. Processes which has high priority. Now, how do you say this process has high priority? Which criteria does the CPU uses to know or to filter the process which high priority and the ones which has less priority? I've told you what actually normally considered is the past time. It's what we call past time. And we said the past time is that amount of time the CPU, a process is allowed or stays, the amount of time the process stays in the CPU is what we call the past time. Now then in the case of process 1, the past time for process 1 is 12, and the process 2 is 3. Which one is going to be given the priority between the two? The past time for process 1 is 12, and the past time for process 2 is 3. Which one is going to be given the priority? Even if process 1 arrived earlier, still this process will be forcefully removed from the CPU, and the process 2 will be allowed in. So depends on the newly arrived processes. If other process arrives, like let's say process 3 arrives, process 4 arrives, all these processes, the past time for process 3 is 2, past time for process 4 is 1. Remember, process 1 is going to be kept waiting in the ready queue, while the other processes are allowed in. That is what we call Conifo effect. That's what that's what we call starvation. But in the case of first come, first serve, in this case, we don't have things like priority. Now, let me now I've given you an example of a starvation, where a scenario, a case study where we have prominent people being allowed in, and ordinary people are kept waiting while the ordinary people are served. So that's an example of starvation. So those people who have less privileges are kept waiting. That is starvation. Now, assuming you have gone to a bank, I'll give you another scenario. You have gone to a bank. So, 2 people have gone to a bank, or 3. Let me use an example of 3 people have gone to a bank. The first one has money to deposit. He has like 1 million to deposit. The second one, he has gone there to inquire, just inquiry. He wants to know how to open an account. You know, that's something that you can be served within 1 minute. And someone who has gone to deposit can be served for a long period. I mean, can be served up to 10 minutes, 12 minutes, even up to 20 minutes. Because there is accounting, there is cutting receipts, and everything has to be done. So another one comes in, wants to deposit a check. You know, depositing a check is easier because it's just, you go there to the teller, maybe you are given a form, you fill the form, and you just give the check. So, in a case if the teller is using what we call preemptive scheduling, he will ask the person who is inquiring to be allowed to be served first, because it's not going to take time. It's just coming to find out something and go, and another one is coming to stay for long. So, but in the case where you find they are using first come, like banks, they use the first come, first served. You have just gone there to just inquire, but you will be asked to stay in the queue for a long period of time, because the reason being you came late. So you are going to be forced to stay in the queue while the first person who came earlier to be served. Now, and whatever you wanted is something which was to take like 2 minutes or 1 minute, and another one is taking 30 minutes. You are waiting there. That is what we call the convoy effect, and that's what we call the convoy effect. And that's why we are saying that in first come, first serve. In this case of first come and first serve, it does not matter the priorities. What matters is the arrival time. That's actually the disadvantages with first come, first serve. Now, I want us to look at an example. I want us to give an example so that for us to understand what we are discussing, we have to look for an example. We look at an example here. As an example, I want us to look at let me look for an example here. So, consider, as an example here, consider a set of 5 processes whose arrival time and pass time are given below. Consider a set of 5 processes whose arrival time and pass time are given below. So we have 5 processes. So we have the process ID. We have process ID. We have arrival time. Then we also have what we call past time. So we have process 1, process 2, process 3, process 4, then process 5. Then process 5. So the arrival time for process 1 is 4. Arrival time for process 2 is 6. Arrival process 3 is 0. And then 6. And then 5. Past the time for process 1 is 5. Past time for process 2 and 4, 3, 2, and 4. So remember here, now the question is, we are saying the question is that we are supposed to consider a set of 5 processes whose arrival time and pass time are given in the table. Then now the question is calculate the average waiting time and the average turnaround time if first come, first serve scheduling algorithm is followed. If we are using first come, first serve scheduling algorithm, calculate the waiting time and the turnaround time for these 5 processes. How can we do this? Now, for us to be able to understand how the calculation is done and how priority is given in the CPU, the first thing that we do, we have to construct what we call the Gantt chart. Is what we call Gantt chart. So the Gantt chart will help us to understand, how we are going to go about these processes. So what is going to happen here in the Gantt chart, we are going to consider, remember, we have said in the first come, first serve, what we consider most is the arrival time. What we are considering most is the arrival time. So, according to you, in this table, using the table, which process will be allowed in first? Remember, we are considering the arrival time. Which process will be allowed in the CPU first? Yes, process 3 will be allowed in first. Why? Because it arrived at time 0. So when you see a process arriving at time 0, it means the CPU did not have anything. In fact, the CPU was idle. So process now, in this case, you just come here, you indicate process 1. I mean, not process 1, we indicate process 3. The arrival time for process 3 is time 0. The arrival time for process 3 is time 0. And what is the completion time for process 3? So the completion time, in this case, we look at now the pass time. Because we have said that the pass time is that the amount which the process is going to take to be executed in the CPU. So this process 3 arrived at time 0, but it's supposed to take 3 milliseconds. We talk about milliseconds or unit of time, 3 unit of time. So the completion time for process 3 will be 3 because it arrived at time 0 and it took 3 minutes to be completed. Then now we come to the second process, which is the second process here. Process 1. Why? Yeah, so we take process 1 because according to the arrival time, it arrived earlier than process 2, process 4, and process 5. So we take process 1. Process 1 was expected to take how long? 5 minutes. So it arrived at 4 minutes, but process 3 was already in the CPU. So it means it waited for process 1 to complete first. Yeah, it waited for process 1 to complete first. So meaning, at what time did the process 1 complete? At what time did the process 1 complete? Now, it is the arrival time, you add the completion time for process 3. So that means it is 4 plus 3, you get 7. So process 1 completed at time 7 minutes. Then, which other process arrived after process 1? Process 2 and then? Process 4. But before we proceed, process
5.
Process 5 arrived. Process 5 arrived. So process 5 arrived at what time?
After 7 minutes.
After 7 minutes. So it took how long?
4 minutes.
So what is the completion time for process 5? 7 plus 4, which is? 11. Yeah, it is supposed to be 11. Then which one followed? Now you see process 2 and the process 4 arrived at the same time. arrived at the same time. So in a case of a tie, what are we expected to do in a case of a tie?
First time.
We don't look at the past time, we look at the process ID. According to first come, first serve, we said we look at the process ID. Now looking at the process 2 and the process 4, this one has smaller process ID. So we consider process 2, and then process 4 follows. So now this one arrived at time 6, but it arrived at this time, and it took how long? 4 minutes. 4 plus 11? 15. Then, which other process that followed? Process 4 was the last process to arrive. It took how long?
2 minutes.
2 minutes. 2 plus 15? 17. Now, there's something here I want you to understand. Now, 17 is the completion time for all the processes completed at this time. So that means the completion time and the pass time is supposed to be the same if the CPU was not idle. Now let's add this. If it's not equivalent to this, then we have to look at the arrival time again. So 5 plus 4, 9. 9 plus 3, 12 plus 2, 14 plus 4, 18. So according to this one, it is 18, and the completion time is 17. So it means there is a point where the CPU was idle. There is a point where the CPU was idle. So is it 18 or 19? Is it 18 or 19? This is 9, 18. So there is a time when the CPU was idle. Are you able to notice where the CPU was idle for 1 hour, for 1 millisecond? Look at process. Look at when process 1 started, and it took how long?
3 minutes.
And process 2 arrived at what time? Process 1 arrived at 4 minutes. So it means when process 1 completed, process 3 completed, the CPU was idle for 1 millisecond before this one arrived. So at that time, there was nothing in the ready queue. So in that case, we are supposed to shade in between here to show that the CPU was idle at this time. So we are supposed to shade to show that the CPU was idle at that time. So that means this will change now everything. Since this will change the matrix. This will change the matrix because the CPU was idle at that time. So process 3 took 3 minutes to complete, 3 milliseconds to complete. And then process 1 arrived. But when this one arrived, it did not start at this time. That was idle time. So it means it started at 4 milliseconds. So there is one time, there is 1 millisecond, which was when the CPU was idle. So process 1 started at 4 milliseconds, and then it completed at what time? Completed. Process 1, 5, completed 4. So 5 plus 4? That's 9. Exactly. Then process 5 completed, arrived at this time, started at 9 milliseconds and completed at what time? Process 5. 13. And then process 2.
13 plus 4.
Process 2 in Abuja?
17.
Then process 4?
2 minutes.
2 minutes. So in Abuja? 19. So it is 19 less 1 minute, which was when the CPU was idle. Now we get 18. Are you getting what I'm saying? Yes. So now now that we have the Gantt chart, we are supposed now to calculate the average waiting time and the average turnaround time. The average waiting time and the average turnaround time. So what we are supposed to do, we will have to tabulate. Now that we know the formulas, turnaround time is the completion time minus the arrival time, waiting time is the turnaround time minus the past time. So we'll proceed from here. So we can now take the process IDs. We can now take the process IDs. We have process ID. We have process 1, process 2, process 3, process 4, and process 5. Then we also have what we call what we want is now the completion time. We want to get the completion time. So the space. I have to completion time. Then we calculate turnaround time. Then we calculate the waiting time. So now we want to get the completion time, and we get the completion time from the Gantt chart. So process 1 completed at what time? We look at here, this is the time the process started, and this is the time. In fact, from this side, it is the time when the process started, and this side from the right is the time the process completed. So it means that process 1 completed at what time? At 9 milliseconds. So process 1 completed at 9 milliseconds. Process 2 completed at 17. Process 3 completed at 3. Process 4 completed at 19. And the process 5, completed at 13. Completed at 19. So, what is the turnaround time for process 1? How do we get the turnaround time? We said to get the turnaround time is
Waiting time plus
waiting time minus arrival time. Is it? Now, the completion time minus arrival time. Completion time is 9 minus the arrival time for process 1 is 4. Minus 4 equals to 5. So the completion time for process 2 was 17. Completion time for process 2 is 17. We minus the arrival time for process 2 is 6. Minus 6, it gives you 11. Completion time for process 3 is 3, and the arrival time for process 3 is 0. So that means it is 3 minus 0, which is 3. Then process 4, the completion time is 19. Completion time is 19 minus the arrival time for process 4 is 6. 19 minus 6 is 19 minus 6, 13. Then this one is 13 minus the arrival time for process 5 is 5. 13 minus 5 is 8 equals to 8. Then the waiting time is, we said is turnaround time minus the past time. Now, turnaround time for process 1 is 5 minus 5. 5 minus 5, which is 0. Which is 0. Turnaround time for process 2 is 11. And the past time for process 2 is 4. 4 minus 11 is 7. Process 3, the turnaround time for process 3 is 3, and the past time is 3 equals to 0. And then process this one is 13. 13 minus past time for process 4 is 2. 2 minus 13, 11. And then we have process 5, which is 8. 8 minus 4. 8 minus 4 is 4. Something I told you, if you look at the waiting time, the waiting time for process 1 is 0. So when you see 0, it means the CPU, the process did not wait. Once it arrived at the ready queue, it was allowed in. So, and now that is actually what happens here. When process 1 arrived, there's no waiting. And if you look at process 3, the waiting time is 0. When it arrived, it entered directly because the CPU was idle. So when process 1 arrived, the CPU was idle. When process 3 arrived, the CPU was idle. So that is why the waiting time is 0. But the others, they had to wait. So because when they arrived, already the CPU was busy executing other processes. Now, what will be now the average? What will be the average turnaround time? What will be the average turnaround time? Now, to get the average turnaround time is now we add this and we divide by the number of processes. Now, what is 5 plus 11? 16 plus 3? 19 plus 13? 19 plus 13? That's 2 plus 8? 40. So the total here is 40. So it means to get the average turnaround time, average turnaround time equals to 40 divided by 5, which is 8. Then the waiting time here is 0 plus 7, 7 plus 0, 7, 7 plus 11, 18, 18 plus 4, 22. So the average waiting time equals to 22 divided by 5. 22 divided by 5 is equals to, do the calculation very fast. 2?
4.4.
4.4. 4.4. So you can say either unit of time or milliseconds. So this is the average turnaround time for all these processes and the average waiting time for all these processes. Yes, unless there is a question. If there is a question there, you can ask a question. If there is any questions, I can take the questions if there is any, so that we proceed to the next algorithm. Maybe where you have not understood, you can ask a question. Good. Yes, so there's no question. We now proceed to the second. Algorithm. We proceed to the second algorithm. Now the second one we want to look at. We have talked about first come, first serve. We now move on to the second algorithm. The second algorithm that we'll discuss about is shortest job first. Shortest job first. We call it SJF. Shortest job first. So let's now look at the shortest job first. How does this algorithm works? How does this algorithm works? Shortest job first. Yes. So shortest job first. In this case, the process which have the shortest pass time are scheduled first. The process which has the shortest pass time are scheduled first. You know, now this becomes now the difference. This kind of algorithm uses preemptive scheduling. It uses what we call preemptive scheduling. Preemptive scheduling. Because here we know even if the process arrived earlier, another one comes which has less pass time. The one which has less pass time will be allowed in, and the one which has high pass time will be preempted or be forcefully removed from the CPU. So, in the case of shortest job first, if two processes have the same pass time, because for the first come we focus much on the arrival time, but for the case of shortest job first, we'll be focusing much on the past time. So in this case, we will be looking at the jobs which has less pass time to be given the priority. Yeah, it is non-preemptive scheduling algorithm. That's what we have said. It is preemptive, non-preemptive scheduling, but in most cases it uses preemptive scheduling algorithm. And one of the advantages with this kind of algorithm is optimal and guarantees the minimum average waiting time. It's optimal and guarantees optimal, what we call minimum average waiting time. So there is no issues with starvation with this kind of scheduling, because one process is allowed in, it is preempted, another one is allowed to go in. Then it provides the standard for the algorithm, since no other algorithm performs better than this one. In fact, this one is the best. This one is the best algorithms that the operating system uses to schedule the processes which are going to the CPU. Is the best algorithm. So, but now there is disadvantages with the shortest job first. It cannot be implemented practically, since past time of the process cannot be known in advance. So that becomes an disadvantage. You see, in a case where we had given examples of processes, process 1, process 2, and process 3. In a case of this process, if process 1 has arrived earlier, it has 12 pass time, and this one has 2 pass time. It means even if this one, if we were to use first come, first serve, this process is expected to complete before it is terminated. it is expected to take all these 12 milliseconds until it completes. That is when it will be terminated. But in the case of this one, in the case of the shortest job first, if this process arrived earlier, but process 2 arrives, which is supposed to take only 2 seconds to complete, this one will be removed from the CPU and this one will be allowed in. This one completes and this one now allowed in to the CPU to proceed, to continue. If this one is allowed in and another one comes which has 1 milliseconds, still this one will be preempted and this one will be allowed in. So that's why we are saying that the shortest job first scheduling algorithm is the best. It's the best. Then we also, this one, it can lead to starvation of processes with large pass time. In a case where the process which has, like now, in the case of this one, this process is likely to starve because the other processes will be coming in, they are allowed in. You are kept waiting. You are kept waiting until when you realize every process that's completed, you are the only one who has not completed. Yeah. So I want us to give an example. And then we can easily understand how does this algorithm works. I want us to give an example here. I want us to look for an example which we can look at. So there's an example here I want us to look at. So we are considering a set of 5 processes whose the arrival time and the pass time are given. We are considering 5 processes, like the one that we did earlier. We are considering 5 processes. So we have the process ID. So we have process 1, process 2. We have process 1, process 2. Process 3, process 4, and the process 5. So the arrival time, and then we have past time. We have the arrival time, and we also have the past time. We have the arrival time, and we have the past time. So the arrival time for process 1 is 2, 1, 4, 0. Then is 2. Then the burst time for process is 1, 5, 1, then 3. So we want now to calculate, assuming now these 2 processes arrived at this time and they took all this time. We calculate the average waiting time. So before we proceed to this, we take a short commercial break. And then when we come back now, we look at how we calculate and get the shortest job first for these processes. We have 5 processes. So we'll be able to understand how this algorithm works. So we are coming shortly after a short break.
Chuo cha anuai cha Kisii Impact Institute of Science and Technology kilicho mjini Kisii wana courses mbalimbali katika taaluma ya kuwawezesha vijana. Wanapeana courses kama hairdressing and beauty therapy, plumbing, electrical installation, miongoni mwa zinginezo. Katika sehemu ya biashara wana courses kama secretarial studies, business management na nyinginezo. Katika masuala ya kompyuta wana courses kama ICT, computer packages, web design na nyinginezo. Pia katika taaluma ya wanahabari wana courses kama mass media, digital TV na radio journalism. Wanafunzi wanatainiwa na Kenya na Chuo cha anuai cha Kisii Impact Institute of Science and Technology kilicho mjini Kisii wana courses mbalimbali katika taaluma ya kuwawezesha vijana. Wanapeana courses kama hairdressing and beauty therapy, plumbing, electrical installation, miongoni mwa zinginezo. Katika sehemu ya biashara wana courses kama secretarial studies, business management na nyinginezo. Katika masuala ya kompyuta wana courses kama ICT, computer packages, web design na nyinginezo. Pia katika taaluma ya wanahabari wana courses kama mass media, digital TV na radio journalism. Wanafunzi wanatainiwa na Kenya na
We will proceed from where we left. Remember, I've said we are using shortest job first. So in this case, when we are calculating, we'll have to we'll draw the Gantt chart. We draw the Gantt chart. We draw the Gantt chart for these processes. We draw the Gantt chart for these processes. So we have the first process. We have the first process. Remember what we are using, what we are focusing much is on the past time, but at the same time, we look at the arrival time. So according to this one, which process arrived earlier? Which process?
Process 4.
Process 4 was the first process. It arrived at what time? 0. How long did this process took to complete? 3 milliseconds. So in that case, this process is not going to complete because at 2 minutes, after 1 minute, another process arrived. This process 4 was expected to take 6 minutes to be completed. It was expected to take 6 milliseconds to be completed, but after 1 millisecond, another process arrived. Process 2 arrived. So what happened? So between process 2 arrived after 1 millisecond, then we also, remember we are considering the past time, and another process here after 2 milliseconds, another one arrived. Then another one arrived here. So which one was to be allowed in first?
Process 1.
Process 1. Why?
Because it takes the shortest time to complete.
It takes the shortest time to complete. But this one, between process 1 and process 2, which one arrived earlier?
Process 2.
Process 2 arrived earlier.
Yes.
So which one is to be allowed in first?
Process 2.
Process 2. Process 2 was to be allowed in first, eh? Hmm? Process 2 was to be allowed in first.
Process 4. Process 4, then process 2.
Remember, this one has not completed. Process 4 has not completed. It has, once another process arrived, the process was preempted. After 1 millisecond, this one was preempted. This was to take how long? 5 minutes. So that means process 2 will be allowed in. Process 2 will be allowed in. So process 4 took how long?
6 seconds.
But it did not complete because this one arrived. It took 1 minute. Yes, it took 1 minute before this one arrived. So it means it took 1 minute, and then process 4 was taken back to waiting or to ready queue. Was taken back to ready queue. So process 2 was allowed. So process 2 was to take how long? 5 minutes. So when process 2 arrived, it was supposed to take how long? 5 seconds. But another process arrived, which is process 2 arrived, which was to take 1 minute, and the process 3 arrived, which was to take another 1 minute. So between process 1 and the process 4, which one will be allowed in?
Process 1.
Process 1. Why?
They have the least master time.
It has the least, but if you look at process 3 and the process 1, it has the same. It has the same past time. Yes?
We look at the arrival time.
We look at the arrival time, exactly. Because there's no way process 3 will start and it has not arrived. You cannot start a process which has not arrived. It is normally you start a process which has already arrived. Because even if process 3 only was expected to take 4 milliseconds, but it arrived at this time. So this process 1 and process 5 arrived at the same time. At the same time, but the time it arrived, this one will be given a priority because it has less past time. So meaning process 2 only took how long, and before it was preempted, process 2 only took 1 minute and it was preempted. So meaning this one already, it has a remaining time of how many minutes? 5. It has 5 minutes remaining, and this one has 4 minutes remaining. Are you getting? So, and it was preempted. So meaning this one took 1 minute and it completed at 2 minutes. So at 2 minutes, 2 processes has already arrived. Process 1 and the process 5 had already arrived. So process 1 was supposed to take how long?
1 minute.
1 minute. So meaning here process 1 will be allowed in. And it takes only 1 minute and finishes at 3 minutes. So this process has been completed. But remember, process 2 and the process 4 has not completed. still it has some time, the past time remaining. Then now at this time, two processes has already arrived. This one has arrived, process 2 has arrived, and which other process? This one has not arrived actually. So even if the past time for this one is less, but at this time this process has not arrived. So meaning process 5 will be allowed in because it arrived earlier. So process 5 will be allowed in. Process 5 will be allowed in. So process 5 will take how long? It's supposed to take 3 minutes. But process at this time, after 1 minute, process 3 arrives. So if process 3 has arrived at this time, so that means this one will be preempted as well. Then process 1 is allowed in. So this one only took 1 minute. Then process, which process allowed in? Process 3 is allowed in. Process 3 is allowed in. And then process 3 takes how long?
1 minute.
1 minute. So this is 5. This is 5. So this one is completed. This one is completed. So which one is going to be allowed in after this? Because at this time all the processes are already in the ready queue. All of them. Now all of them, they are now waiting. Process 2, process 3, and process 2, process 4 and 5, they are in a ready queue. They are waiting. Which one will be allowed in? Now, in that case, because all of them, they are already in the ready queue, we'll consider the past time. We'll consider the past time. So process 5 will be allowed in. Process 5 will be allowed in, which will take the remaining time, which is 2 plus 5. 2 plus 5? 7. 2 plus 5, 7. Another one, another one will be allowed. So at this time, this one will complete, is it? Then process 2 will follow, which will take 4 minutes. Process 2 will take 4 minutes. 4 plus 7, 11. Then, so process 2 is completed. So we are left with process 4, which has 5. 5 plus this, 16. So process 4 complete. So we said that the past time and the completion time is supposed to be the same if there is no idle time. The completion time is 16, and the past time, if we add 4, 1 plus this, 6, 1 plus 5, 6, 6 plus 1, 7 plus, this is 13, then 16. So if you add this, and the completion time is supposed to be the same. So that is how we calculate now. We are supposed now to calculate the average waiting time. We are supposed to calculate average waiting time for the two processes. We are supposed to calculate waiting time. So before that one, we'll have to have another table. We have to have another table. This is process ID. The process ID. Completion time. Completion time. We have completion time. We have completion time. We have turnaround time. and we also have waiting time. So let's now look at the processes. We have process 1, process 2, process 3, process 4. Process 4 completion time. So the completion time for process 1, in fact in this case now, we only have it once here. Process 1, we only have it once here. It completed at 3 milliseconds. So the completion time is 3. Completion time for 2, here it completed at 2 and also it completed at 11. So it completed at this time. So we take 11. Process 3, the completion time for process 3 is 5. Completion time for process 4 is 16. And the completion time for process 5, completion time for process 5 is 7. So to get the turnaround time, we said it's completion time. Completion time here is 3 minus the arrival time. The arrival time for process 1 is 2. So 2 minus it is 1. The completion time for process 2 is 11. 11 minus the arrival time minus 1, which is 10. Then the completion time for process 3 is 5. 5 minus the arrival time for process 3 is 4 minus 4, which is 1. The completion time for process 4 is 16. 16 minus the arrival time is 0 minus 0, which is 16. The completion time for process 5 is 7 minus the arrival time is 2, which is 5. And now the waiting time, we are supposed to look at the turnaround time, which is 1 minus the past time for this one is 0. So that means the waiting time is 0 for process 1 is 0. Then process 2, turnaround time is 10 minus the past time is 5. Past time is 5 minus 5, which is 5. Then turnaround time for 3, process 3 is 1. 1 minus 1 is 0. And the turnaround time for process 4 is 16. 16 minus past time for process 4 is 6, equals to 10. And lastly, we have 5 minus the minus 3, which is 2. So looking at the waiting time, it means process 1 and process 3 were allowed in. They were allowed in without waiting. Yeah, when the waiting time is 0, it means once they arrived, they were allowed in. Like now, let's look at this chart. Process, where is process 1? Process 1. When process 1 arrived, already process 2 was preempted and it was allowed. So it means there was no waiting time. And if you look at process 3, when process 3 arrived, other processes were already inside, but this process was allowed in, so there was no waiting time. So that is why process 1 is 0 and the process 3 is 0. But the other, like 2, you see 2, when 2 arrived, process 2 arrived, already process 1 was already in. So it waited for 1 minute. So there was a waiting time. for 5 minutes or milliseconds. So this is how you construct the Gantt chart, and that's how you get the turnaround time and waiting time. Now let's quickly get the average waiting time. Now the average waiting time, we add 1 plus 10. 1 plus 10 is 11. 11 plus 1, 12. 12 plus 16, 28 plus 5, 23. 33. Yeah. Then waiting time here is 0. 0 plus 5 is 5. 5 plus 0 is 5. Plus 10 is 15. Plus here is 17. Plus is 17. So what is going to happen? We are going to use the average, the total, we divide by the number of processes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the average turnaround time is equals to 33 divided by 5, which is 33 divided by 5. Can you calculate? And the average waiting time equals to 17 divided by 5. So that 3 divided by 5, 6.6. 6.6. And this one? 17 divided by 5? 3.4. 3.4. So this is how you calculate the average turnaround time and the average waiting time. So at this time, I want to allow questions. If there is any question, you can ask. If there is any question, you can ask before we wind up our lessons today. If there is any question, you can ask. Yes? Any questions? There's no question. So thank you for your time. We have learned a number of issues here. We have learned a number of things here. We'll pick from here next time when we meet here. Even thank you for your time to whoever was listening. Until next time, we'll meet again. I was your host, Patrick Nyabayo. Thank you. We'll meet again.
Chuo cha anuai cha Kisii Impact Institute of Science and Technology kilicho mjini Kisii wana courses mbalimbali katika taaluma ya kuwawezesha vijana. Wanapeana courses kama hairdressing and beauty therapy, plumbing, electrical installation, miongoni mwa zinginezo. Katika sehemu ya biashara wana courses kama secretarial studies, business management na nyinginezo. Katika masuala ya kompyuta wana courses kama ICT, computer packages, web design na nyinginezo. Pia katika taaluma ya wanahabari wana courses kama mass media, digital TV na radio journalism. Wanafunzi wanatainiwa na Kenya National Institute